Good afternoon, it's Julia from Rosalind Road Therapy Centre. Today we're going to speak on behalf of SAOPA on the subject of cancer. This is our second time to speak about cancer, and the focus for this week is certainly going to be about the body-mind connection. This has been my experience for several years, and I think it's very wise of SAOPA to acknowledge that without looking at where the body and the mind all fit in together, we can't just treat the body as just a mechanical instrument that needs food and treatment. We need to look at the person and the whole picture. So especially for today's discussion, I will definitely be focusing on three areas: the body, the mind, and the spirit. All three influence each other. We can't have a look at a health issue or an emotional issue or a spiritual issue without taking all three into considerations. So what is interesting about cancer is that sometimes there's this idea that there are foreign cancer cells or foreign cells that have invaded our body and need to be fought. But in fact, cancer cells started out as just one of the many trillions of cells in the human body. So from very early on, after a little baby is made, cells start dividing, and of course they grow into different organs and the brain and the heart and the skin, and grow and evolve, and our bodies grow and change our whole life. And somewhere in the journey of growing and changing and developing, some of our cells will develop, will go rogue, will change their shape and their purpose and be cancer cells. And did you know that every single human being does have a collection of cancer cells in their body, but it only becomes diagnosed and classified once a certain mass of cells has been reached. So that's on the purely physical level. There's the cell and this person who's made up of hundreds of cells, and some of them have changed, and there comes a point when they've changed so much, a person is told, you have cancer. And let's have a look at that. Once we've heard that sound, you have cancer, as with many diagnoses, but I think particularly with the cancer one, I think it's important to acknowledge that although each person has a unique experience of their disease, cancer has a feeling around the world. Humans all over the world have descriptions and ideas and experiences about cancer. For example, you often hear people say, there's a lot of cancer in my body, and this cancer is very dangerous, and this cancer is treatable, and so on. And we as humans are part of that huge group of thinking. And our minds will find it very difficult to connect from what the rest of the world is saying. And that's part of the challenge of the cancer journey. There's the physical journey, the body journey, the treatment. You heard Tongi speak earlier about nutrition and movement. But what we need to look at is also, how is this mind going to navigate this journey with the world saying one thing and doctors saying one thing and our own thoughts saying all kinds of things, and how to navigate those to take care of ourselves. So something very powerful that a cancer patient told me is that regardless of the amount of support, encouragement, you might have an amazing medical team and a family and a caregivers team, regardless of how supportive they are, ultimately there's something about the cancer journey that is very lonely. And let's look at that loneliness on all the levels. Somebody might be driving you to your treatments and caring for you afterwards, but during that treatment or in the middle of the night when that pain is being felt, ultimately one is on one's own. And I think as caregivers, it's very important to recognize that there is an aspect of this journey that is lonely. It is physically lonely. That person who's feeling nauseous or fearful or in pain is feeling it on their own in their body. And it's probably a very difficult thing to speak about, or maybe they don't want to speak about it all that time. So let's remember when we're working with a cancer patient, that feeling of loneliness on the physical level of going through the treatments by themselves. Mentally, it is possible that the person will also be feeling, but I'm on my own out here, no one can really understand. And in that case, I would say if it's possible to find a support network of people going through the same thing, that can provide a huge support and a mental encouragement for a person. The person who's had to lose all their hair or sit on a ward with a whole lot of other patients on chemotherapy are a huge resource to the cancer patient. I've been told by many, many cancer patients that that chemotherapy ward can be an unbelievably peaceful place. From the outside, we might not expect that, but these patients are all in it together, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. And by sharing that peace, we can provide a lot of mental comfort. Thirdly, if we look at the spiritual level, the feeling of being spiritually alone is a very terrifying place to be. And I think for many cancer patients, for all people really, but with the intensity of the cancer diagnosis, it is critical to look at the spiritual aspect. If one has a spiritual companion or a spiritual mentor or some kind of system, one needs to rely on that. One needs to include one's spirit, a time for prayer or a time for fellowship in going on this journey. As lonely as it is, none of us can really afford to be spiritually alone. And so for the cancer patient, we can do them a great service by taking them to some kind of spiritually supportive place and not leaving them to do this alone. Right, now let's have a look, going back to the body. What happens in the body when this lump is felt or this strange experience is felt, or maybe at the point of diagnosis? I think the overriding feeling our patients will tell us is fear. Out of joy, sadness, worry, grief, and fear. Certainly fear is a prevalent experience in the cancer experience. And let's have a look, what does fear do to our bodies? So we have discussed before that our whole body is in a constant cycle of expansion and contraction. You may remember I spoke about the brain doing this expansion and contraction in the skull. We call it the brain cycle. But of course, it's not only the brain that expands and contracts. Consider for a moment your lungs. Every single moment of the day and the night, as long as you're alive, your lungs are expanding as you breathe out and contracting to allow for air to come in. And then they fill up with lungs again, with oxygen again, and then we breathe it out. So the lungs are in a constant movement of expansion and contraction. The heart is pumping away, expanding and contraction. The muscles are expanding and contraction. And what does the feeling of fear do to our body? Fear is strongly connected with contraction. So now the breathings, that was a big expansion and then a big contraction, becomes the shoulders, the throat. Wherever one experiences fear in your body, that tight contraction will affect the movement of the body. And we've spoken before, but I'd like to say again, where there is contraction, a very simple but very necessary step is that experience of stopping at least once a day, but probably a lot more, and really connecting with the breath, not with the idea of getting more air into my body, but now let's make it something bigger. Let's experience a whole expansion in the body and pushing those chemicals of fear that are pumping through the body out of the body and letting oxygen in. And oxygen that's going to go to every single corner of the body and help it repair itself, help it deal with the things it needs to do. Think of that brain that's stuck in this fearful state. We want to take it into expansion and get that movement going. If we look at it, might sound strange to talk about expansion on the spiritual level, but expansion means going larger and connecting with more. It's as critical on a spiritual level as it is breathing is to the body. If the spirit was in a small space and just getting through the day, or maybe the spirit was not getting any attention, if there was ever a time to bring in that expansion of the spirit, and in praise and song, certainly we feel it, regardless of the state of our health, how the heart and the spirit expand and grow larger. And on this journey of dealing with the body and the mind and the spirit, on the cancer journey, let's bring in whatever brings in expansion as a way of balancing the contraction of fear. There are two different approaches for the cancer patients, and I think they're both extremely valid and for each patient to choose for themselves. Some people consider the cancer journey a battle, and the language is about being a survivor and fighting this thing and using every last breath. And I think some people have that kind of personality or that kind of mind that gains a lot, that feels very strong when they say, I'm going to war and I'm going to fight this thing. And if they fight it on the body level, it means I'm going to make changes to my lifestyle now. I'm going to make changes to my nutrition now. I'm going to interrogate my doctor and every single method. It's a very active, dynamic way of dealing with things. And you think of during the cancer journey, a person shaving their hair, a person maybe getting a lot of scars on their body. That's all part of the survivor approach to cancer. And if that's something that feeds your mind and your spirit, I say go for it and go all in. For some people, that approach doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't sit well. It doesn't support them. For some people are looking to step back a little bit and not say, this is the big C. Someone today again spoke to me about the big C and going to war with it and saying, this is my body. This is a disease that my body is showing right now. And I'm going to become quieter and inward and very carefully work with my body to encourage it, to look at where it's struggling, to work with cancer as I would if I had diabetes or depression, and say, this is part of what's happening in my body and I'm going to do the things that need, but on the whole, I'm going to keep living. And for those people, the war battle mentality doesn't help them. It's not neither or wrong or right. There are two different ways that different personalities work with a thing. As a caregiver, it's important that we acknowledge the way that the patient has chosen. It is their journey. Remember, we said it can be a very lonely journey. If they've come to a point in their life that they feel this is how they'd like to work with it, what they don't need is another voice and another opinion adding more noise to their journey. If they prefer to become quiet and work with it in the quiet way, we encourage and support. And if they want someone to go to battle with them, then you pull on your armor and you go to battle with them, physically, mentally, and spiritually. I'd like to talk again about the body, mind, and spirit aspects, and to say that for the person who's been diagnosed with cancer and is now going on this cancer journey, change is part of that reality. From the moment that lump has been felt, or the formal words, you've got cancer, have been said, or the first treatment begins, there are going to be changes in this body. And that's not always easy for us. You know, every time we get more gray hair, every time we realize, but I'm going to need my glasses, not because I'd like to, but because I need them to see. Our bodies are changing and evolving all the time. And with a big change like a cancer treatment, that's a lot to take on board. And if a person's taking on board lifestyle changes, maybe stopping smoking or changing your way of eating or change your way of moving, maybe you're a person who could move a lot before and now you can't because of the treatment, the body has to acclimatize to that. And we need to be kind to people whose body is going through this massive change and how they see their body. And with the physical changes and the body changes are the mind changes. Maybe you're a person who believes that exercise is something you do every day without question. That's a big mind change if you have to change to being gentler on the body. And just as with the spirit, if the spirit needs to take on a new approach or a new discipline or a new way of doing things, that's a big change. And we want to have compassion for people and support them on their way. As we know, in any way of life, change doesn't happen from A to B in a jump. I was a meat eater and now I'm vegetarian. I was a person who had 3 spoons of sugar in my coffee and now I'm not. That's really just not how the mind and the body work. Most of us will start with a good resolution in the mind and the spirit, and the body will follow for 2 or 3 days, and then there'll be a difficult day or a tricky way and we'll fall back, and then we'll get up again and try again. And so as caregivers of these patients, let us acknowledge that this is what this person is doing. Picking up the pieces, starting again, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Yes, there will be massive changes on a physical level, and the person may never go back to what they were, and that's a process to accommodate and to work with. I spoke previously when we spoke about the cancer situation that a big mental challenge for the cancer patient is the sheer bombardment of information from the environment, from their caregivers, because there won't just be one, from the neighbors, from the community, from the family, but also from the bombardment of the own ideas, the own fears and concerns, and the what if, and I saw this happen to my neighbor, and I read on the news, and in my family, and all of those ideas. And absolutely, that mental battle to have a time every day, more than once a day where possible, to stop all the cancer thinking and the cancer talk and change the mind and focus the mind on something else is a critical mind aspect. Now, on a spiritual level, it is not my field, it's not my place to advise people spiritually, but I can advise that without including the spiritual aspects, this is going to be more difficult. Whatever a person's spiritual beliefs, I think it would be fair, anyone can acknowledge that since the beginning of creation, God has been in charge. God has brought this earth from the beginning to where we are now. Our body is part of this creation, and part of the spiritual loneliness of I have to understand everything and do all of this on my own, and I have to figure out and I have to make good decisions is ultimately a spiritual one. And we should never forget that this creation is unfolding according to a will that is bigger than ours. And we don't have to fight this whole thing alone. We are not, in fact, alone. And we are not solely responsible. Every single thing we do is not going to change everything that happens in our body. There is more. And I think it's important to acknowledge it. Finally, as a practice, is it a physical or a mental or a spiritual practice? I'm not sure. You can choose to see it the way you like. Is to take a look at this body, and to take a look at this body, not my body, this body. this vehicle that is going on this experience. And let's imagine a part of that body was sick and had to be removed. It could be a hand, a breast, a prostate, and an eyeball. Different parts of the body may physically have to be removed as part of the treatment. For that patient, do they feel different? Yes, of course they do. Are they different deep down inside? No, of course not. Part of the physical, mental, and spiritual awareness that we can have around this disease is that I'm not this body. Without this hand, if this hand were removed, the whole essence of Julia will be exactly the same. I might not be able to move the same way and use my hands in the same way, but I'm not this body. This body that might be losing hair or have scar tissue or have chemicals in it can be seen. It can be looked at, but it's not the whole of me by any stretch of the imagination. And this mind, this mental being that has all these ideas coming in and all these ideas that go out and can feel very happy and then very sad and then very frightened and then very peaceful. Those thoughts and feelings can be seen. And they change all the time. But who Julia really is does not change. So we can start to have a little bit of space now and again from this body and know that the changes in this body do not change who we really are. These thoughts and feelings that come and go, they are not who we really are. And so we will not change. And perhaps that's part of the spiritual journey, is to start getting a feeling of who are we and who are we without this body or without this mind. Let's not say without, behind or inside this body. There is so much more. And the cancer journey can be a way for a person to stop and reflect on their life. Let's reflect on those physical aspects. Remember that little baby after it was formed was a bunch of cells that were growing and changing. At some point, some of that person's cells grew and changed, and some of them became cancer cells. Maybe they got cut out, maybe they got treated with chemicals, but the other cells stayed the person and keep going. So let's not focus only on that body or that part of the body that's created this cancer situation, but the more. The cancer cells would have reached a point where they became enough to be called cancer, almost always because of some factor in the environment, whether it was trauma or chemicals in the environment, but something built up to that point. I personally believe that it's risky territory to spend too much time and energy on the why. What brought those cells that were always there to suddenly grow into this thing called cancer? The why question uses a huge amount of physical and emotional and spiritual energy. And I don't know that the answers will change the journey hugely. So for the body and the mind to be aware that going on the why journey is maybe to look at, can I afford to go on this why journey, or shall I spend that energy on, this is where I am, these are the lifestyle, nutrition, movement, mental, spiritual activities that I have that I need to change to support this body and mind, and I'm going to spend my energy that way. So in summary, I'd like to say again, this can be a very lonely journey, physically, mentally, and spiritually. This can be a very powerful journey to physically get to know the body, where its limitations are, what its strengths are, and most of all, that what is happening to this body affects us, but it is not the whole of us. Mentally, it can be lonely, but a very powerful experience in discovering that these thoughts and emotions and ideas can be stepped away from. They can be seen. And who we really are is not all those thoughts and emotions. And finally, spiritually, from that very, very tight, difficult, contracted, fearful state, a growth away from contraction into expansion, physical expansion, mental expansion of understanding and seeing ourselves in a whole new way, but certainly a spiritual expansion into discovering far beyond who we thought we were and how we experience our world. I'm Julia from Roseland Road Therapy Center, and let's look at the whole cancer journey from a body, mind, and spirit experience as something far more than a group of cells that has gone rogue and changed how it is experienced.